I just realized someone is cutting grass outside. I have no control over it. I hope people wouldn't be able to hear this background noise.
We are ready to begin.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this another special session this evening. Thank you for joining us, those who are in Facebook and those who are in Zoom. This evening is special because we have a special guest. Our evening with the doctor. We have Chaplain Roman Kozlov, and he will be presenting to us how not to get lost as you experience loss in your lives. I'm sure any one of us who are here tonight had experienced loss, whether it is our loved ones, relatives, friends, or colleagues. Tonight, before I'm gonna introduce our speaker, I would like to remind you that after the presentation, you have the opportunity to ask questions, and you may place your questions in the chat box if you are in Zoom, or in the comment section if you are in Facebook. Our speaker for tonight is Chaplain Roman Kozlov. He is a board-certified chaplain and works at the Mercy Hospital South in St. Louis, Missouri. Prior to that, he completed 2 years of residency and clinical pastoral education at St. Luke's Hospital in Missouri. He brings a diversified experience from being a chaplain in New York, Florida, and now Missouri. He is the father of 2 girls, Elizabeth, 17, Emma, 12, and a 2-year-old son, Matthew. Roman and his wife, Stelly, live in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, I will turn you over to our speaker, Chaplain Roman Kozlov.
Greetings to everybody. It's my pleasure, it's my privilege to meet with you over the Zoom and present this seminar about grief. And the title is How Not to Get Lost When You Lose Someone. And as our presenter mentioned earlier, that we all experience some type of losses in this life. It's just part of being human. And I personally want to share that for me, it started probably one major loss I experienced when I was still a student at seminary, and my 11-year-old nephew tragically died. I wasn't there, I was in a different part of Russia. And I remember when I eventually got back, how my sister, my nephew's mom, grabbed me like this and was shaking and were asking, where was God? How come it happened? And I made at this point probably one of the common and first mistake that people do. I tried to intellectually answer her and explain something where it needed emotional response, not intellectual. We all experience losses in our life, and we all have a lot of questions, and it's easy to get lost. And many times we can get lost without realizing that we are lost. Another big loss in my life was the loss of my parents. And when it happened, I was in the United States and I couldn't travel back at that time. And I was thinking, if I wouldn't talk about it, if I wouldn't think about it, it will go away. It's one of the common mistakes that we all do. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And this is also actually what I learned about ambiguous loss at that time. ambiguous loss is loss that is not clear. It's like you lose someone, but you never attended funeral. It's when it could be ambiguous loss could be two kinds. When you lose person physically, but you never really had the chance to attend the funeral. For example, the most classic example is someone missing in action, but you're still not sure if they will ever be found or show up. And then another kind of ambiguous loss is when person is always with you physically, but emotionally, they're not there. And one of the classical examples of this will be a dementia or people with mental illness. When you have someone in front of you, but they're not there. And this is what makes ambiguous loss probably one of the most difficult loss to heal from or recover, because there is no certainty. You don't know how you can grieve about something that physically is in front of you. So, as I mentioned this term ambiguous loss, I also want to say that ambiguous loss could be big and small. Going through the divorce could be ambiguous loss. Losing someone from your side could be ambiguous loss. And in the context of pandemic that we all experience, the whole world experienced a lot of losses. Loss of job, loss of loved ones. As a chaplain in the hospital, I've seen so many times when someone who had COVID-19 was dying in the hospital, and the hospital didn't permit anybody to come into the room. Or maybe the spouse had COVID-19 as well, and they cannot be together. We were trying to do our best to bring iPad that they can see and communicate, but still it was so hard. The people were separated, they couldn't come, or they were allowing only one or two people to come. It's hard. And this pandemic brought a second wind, so to speak, to the idea of ambiguous loss. You probably lost and missed so many opportunities to see your family. I personally know my friends who didn't see their family for a year until they eventually were vaccinated, and they only then felt comfortable to see their family face to face. So when we experience losses, ambiguous losses, loss of the loved one, we don't know what to do. We feel lost, and it's easy to be lost and without even realizing it. As I mentioned, when I lost my parents, I tried to compartmentalize it, to push it somewhere deep inside me, because I couldn't do much about it. But what happens that when we experience loss, experience normal emotion of grief, but we never engage or express it, it doesn't go anywhere, and we cannot heal. At the beginning, in the advertisements of the presentation, I don't know if I had a chance to mention, one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about grieving, and they don't understand the difference between grieving and mourning. Grief is one of the basic human emotions that I believe every human being experience one way or another. Mourning is the outward, it's almost like a public expression of grieving. So when we experience emotion of grief, it's natural, it's normal, and we all experience it. But unfortunately, not all people engage this emotion and express it and mourn it. And if you forget everything that will be said today about grief and mourning, I want you to remember at least one major thing, that healing comes when we can express and mourn our grief. Healing is mourning your grief, mourning and expressing it outside of yourself. It's especially difficult for men to express their feelings. But it's not only men, it's normal for all of us. Try to hide, to be quiet, to withdraw when we experience grief, because grief, when we experience grief, we experience a lot of pain. And normal reaction for pain is to withdraw and to close up. Nobody moves toward pain. And it seems counterintuitive, but I want to share with you that the secret of healing in grief is going through this emotion, confronting your pain and dealing with this. It seems counterintuitive, it seems overwhelming and not natural, but this is the only way we can heal through grief. And by the way, the expression healing through grief, for some people it's difficult to wrap your head around. How can you heal through grief? Can I ever heal through grief? There are a few other words that used in this correlation. One of them could be reconciling your grief. And I like it. So healing in grief means that you reconcile to your loss. We cannot restore what we lost, but we can reclaim part of ourselves that we missed in that loss. So today, as we talking about loss and grief, I want to use the illustration as we're dealing with this, that I really like one of the author who wrote about grief, Alan Wolfelt. He used this illustration. He says, grieving is like going through the wilderness that is unknown to you. And it's easy to get lost, but you can get through. You can get through, but you need to make this journey. You need to have intention to heal. You need to set your mind on this journey. And as I was preparing for this seminar, as I was studying to be a chaplain, I discovered overwhelming amount of literature actually about grief, mourning. And one of the things that when you study books about grief, there is a danger that it can give you an idea that your grief should be prescribed, how you should grieve. And this is wrong. There are a lot of things that are common for many people, but everyone's grief is unique. But people study grief and they develop different stages of grief. And one of the misconceptions is that when you go through grief, you go through certain stages in a certain order. And this is not true. There is no order in grief. It's a very messy experience. But at the same time, there are certain essential points that are common for all people as we grieving, as we mourning, as we dealing with this. So I would like to mention some major touchstones or major pillars or points that we common for everyone as we are grieving. But at the same time, as I mentioned them, I want to highlight once again to say that everyone's grief is unique. It could be so different. It depends on what's happening with you, who you are, and you cannot prescribe. I cannot prescribe the way I grieve to you, even though there will be some similarities. I heard one woman talking about losing in 6 months her father, her brother, and her dog. And when she described it, she put it this way: my father was drinking all his life. I didn't have much relationship with him. And when he died, it was very sad. And I grieved. I was sad. And then a few months later, my brother died. I was very disconnected from my brother. And as sad as it was a big loss, but she embarrassingly confessed that her biggest loss was her dog, whom she had for 10, 15 years. And she let the dog out, and the dog slept in in a pool in her yard that had a cover. The dog went under the cover and couldn't get back and drowned. And somehow, she says, it's embarrassing for me to admit, but this is when I got really sick. I could get out of bed for 4 days. And the reason that I share this experience just to show that how people have grief that is unique and it's very different for everyone. Something that strikes chord for you may be a little bit different for another. So we all are different. We all are unique. But at the same time, there are a few things that I'm about to mention that are extremely important and common for everyone. And the first one, ingredient as we start our journey toward healing, is to accept the reality of death. Because healing happens not in the head, but in the heart. Our ability to heal depends on our emotional capacity to experience emotions of mourning and grieving. So when we hear the news that someone who is dear to our heart died, first we hear it with our head, and it seems like we got it. But in reality, it takes some time to get it before it sinks from head to the heart. And sometimes it could be a long distance, and it could take days and weeks, because it's a process. It's not an event. It's a process, and it's important to understand that. And that's why when I mentioned earlier, ambiguous grief is one of the most difficult to grieve, because there is no closure. And one of the things that I want to mention to all of us who experience a lot of losses, ambiguous losses through pandemic, that we can start naming them. And it maybe when we name them, it will help the process of sinking from head to the heart, that we can feel it and begin to grieve it. So the first, I said first, I don't want to put them in order, but the first that I mentioned, important ingredient on the way of healing is acceptance. Acceptance of reality of your loss. Acceptance of reality of a death. And it takes some time for it to sink it in our heart. And I said that the key to healing, the key to reconciling your grief is expressing it and mourning it. And the more you can say it out loud, the more you can talk about it, the more it becomes real for you. That's why sometimes it's in-jerk reaction when people hear about death. They said, stop it, I don't want to hear. And it's like, because if you hear it, if you talk about it, it becomes more real. And it's important that it becomes real, our losses. And when I say our losses, I talk about death of the loved one, but I also don't want to pass over other small losses that we have, but they're real and tangible. Sometimes they're ambiguous and not tangible. Maybe you lost your favorite job because of the pandemic. Maybe you didn't have a chance to see someone for a long time. And it's important to name it, to say it, to let it become real, to accept it. Another important ingredient on our journey to healing is to feel the pain. I mentioned earlier that we tend to avoid the pain. It's normal, it's human, but it's interesting that we live in a culture that is very grief avoiding culture, that it's easy to repress, to avoid, And I personally found myself doing, I call it, my defensive technique is compartmentalize. I heard about death of my parents, and I didn't know how to take it. I couldn't travel right away, and I just compartmentalized. Compartmentalize it, thinking it's not going to hurt. My friends, unless we engage and mourn and express our grief, we cannot heal. The key to healing is expressing it and mourning. And it takes a lot of courage to move, to face the pain of loss. There is an expression in Jewish culture when we talk about mourning. The expression goes like this. They call it to sit Shiva. Shiva means to sit in your mourning, not to do anything, just to sit and cry and let it sink in. And in reality, it's extremely wise thing that we can learn from Jewish people. And I'm sure there is something similar in many cultures when it's time to grieve, to mourn, to take time, to cry. And it's not just that we're expressing it, but we need to feel it, because only when we feel it, then it gets out of our system. If we compartmentalize it, if we avoid it, if we repress this very potent emotion, grief, becomes toxic and it kills us slowly. And again, it seems counterintuitive. We avoid pain of loss. We avoid to face it. We avoid to feel it. And we think that it helps us to deal with this. But in reality, it slowly kills us. And this toxicity poisons our body versus if we turn ourselves toward it, if we face it, if we begin to experience it, this is when healing comes. Of course, especially at the beginning, it feels so overwhelming how you can feel it. And it's normal to insulate yourself. There is time when maybe at the beginning you don't want to talk to anybody. At the beginning, it's okay. The grief counselors even use this technique they call dosing your pain, because your pain is so great, it's so overwhelming that you want to dose off. But it's important that after a while, we begin to engage it little by little, that we, with support of friends, maybe counselor, maybe we in this place, quiet, we take time off, that we begin like getting our feet wet little by little, but we turn towards it and we begin to face it, dozing off, but we need to deal with it little by little. But it was interesting. I have a friend who does the grief support group for people who lost their loved ones, and they don't even allow people to join the group until 3 months after the death. And the reason that they do it, because they say it's important to get to this space that you more prone toward healing, because it's process. It doesn't happen overnight. Another big misconception that we have in our culture is that we can get over the grief. And there are a lot of expressions that you can hear from people when you're grieving. Oh, chin up, keep your chin up, or get over it, or keep a good face. In reality, it's just expressing a big misconception. You cannot do it. You don't need to keep a good face. We all need time to cry. We need time to feel what we experience and also express. Remember what I said at the beginning. Key to healing is a mourning outside of yourself, expressing it, talking it, naming it, finding support in others. So far I identified two important pillars as we grieving. One was accepting it. Second one was beginning to feel our pain. The third one is remembering the one whom you lost. There is another big misconception, because some people think that what do we do when we have anniversary of the death? What do we do when there is a birthday of someone whom we lost? Sometimes it could be some of the hardest days of the year when there is anniversary of a death, anniversary of the uh, time when we get married, before we lost our spouse, and so on. And we feel that we need to avoid, in reality, remembering those who died has a therapeutic experience. I heard people were making a memory album where they put pictures, and this is actually begins probably the most at the funeral. You know how at many funerals there is a stand with a lot of pictures of the person who died, starting from the childhood, family pictures, funny pictures, sad pictures. But this is one of the good ways to engage your memory and to remember those who died. I talked to another friend. She lost her mother just few years ago, I think about 2 years ago. So, and she was saying that she has a niece who was getting married, and she did the most fascinating thing. She wanted to get married on the anniversary of the death of her grandmother. Usually people try to avoid those things, but she said, I would like to do it and remember my grandmother. And this, my friend was showing me a picture of the most beautiful wedding. And at the wedding, they had a stand with the pictures of their grandmother. And they had few elements that honored their grandmother who died. And I was thinking at the beginning, it could look a little bit strange and weird, but in reality, it was one of the healthiest way to remember someone who has a big part of your life. They're there, they didn't go anywhere. They continue to live in our memories, let's face it. And it was the way to create a positive memory, something that you can remember and honor and think. And again, those things doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. So be patient to yourself. Another important ingredient on the journey of healing is our self-identity. You see, our self-identity, the way how we perceive ourselves, tied up, big part of it is relationship with the most important people in our life. And when we lose someone who was part of our life for 20, 30, 50 years, we lose part of ourselves too, because they are part of us. It's difficult for us to see ourselves without this person. And even in the social settings, our identities change. We change from husband to the widow, from the parent, if you lose a child, to a bereaved parent. This loss forces you sometimes to take a totally new role that you're not used to. For example, maybe it was the responsibility of your spouse always to take the garbage out or to balance the checkbook. It seems so simple, but now if you have to do it, it changes the way how you see yourself. You have to take a new role. You have to rethink your identity, who you are, and it could be extremely painful. You can begin to feel less of yourself, that you cannot function But at the same time, if we graciously and with courage begin this journey, the reward is to find new meaning and maybe new confidence in ourselves. So part of grieving is dealing with identity crisis. And I just wanted to mention, because when we recognize it, when we know about it, it helps us to include it in this process of mourning and grieving. Another one is the search for meaning. The search for meaning seems like a big one, seems like overwhelming, but let's face it. When we lose someone that we love, we begin to question everything. The meaning of life. We begin to ask how come it happened? We begin to question God. Why did God allow it? And I just want to normalize it and say, you're not going crazy. It's part of grieving. When we have identity crisis and we trying also to find meaning in life, because just like we lose someone, we almost losing ourselves, and we trying to find meaning. We feeling empty. Emptiness is a normal, it's part of grieving, because something that was essential part of us, we lost it. Death calls to confront your spirituality. I like this expression. I came across it in one of the books, that death calls to confront our spirituality. And I want to encourage you not to be afraid when we are questioning our spirituality. Sometimes we might even question existence of God. We might be angry at God. God is big. He can take it. But if we would not shy away from it, if we will be willing little by little to take it, I use this expression, I want to repeat it again, there is a rich reward behind it. We will find more meaning in our life, meaning who we are. The most important part is not to look for the quick answers, because sometimes it's a deep longing for meaning that comes from here, not from here. I used this gesture before, but I want to repeat it again. Grief and mourning comes from the heart, and this is where it happens. And sometimes when we ask all these questions, how and why, they also come from here, not from here. And sometimes we try to find, or we might have friends who can give us intellectual answers to all those questions. And most of the time it's not satisfying, because it takes more time, and we need to find new peace and reconciliation with God. And another, I would say the last one that I want to mention so far, I mentioned five, and I'm about to mention sixth one. The first one was accept. The second one was to feel the pain, accept the loss, accept the death, to start feeling it, maybe in small doses, feeling it move toward pain. The third one was to remember. The fourth one, to understand that you will have to deal with a new identity to find. The next one, number 5, was meaning, to find meaning in life. And the last one that I want to mention today is to let others to help you. You don't have to go through grief alone. Your ability and capacity to heal depends on 2 factors: your inner resources that you have and your willingness to accept help from others. You need to allow others to love you and support you. If you are not allowing and you're not receiving love from others, people around you, you're not allowing healing in your life. And as I mentioned, even though your grief is very unique and you probably have 100% assurance, and you could be right that nobody can understand you. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who went through the similar journey, and they can be a companion for you in your unique journey. So ask for help. Allow others to help you. It's extremely, extremely important. And as I mentioned, these 6 important pillars in our journey to healing, I didn't talk specifically much about God because I wanted what I talk about be universal for other people. But I want to say for us, for those who know God, as Bible says, we grieve differently. We grieve with hope, and it makes the whole difference when in our grief, it's not a total doom, but there is a hope. And God, our relationship with God, could be this anchor that helps us to go through this storm. I really like the expression by Winston Churchill. He was an English prime minister during World War II. And when I was doing residency, clinical pastoral education, and dealing with all these dark emotions, one of my colleagues, another chaplain, in his cubicle, he had this statement by Winston Churchill that said that when you go through hell, keep going, because this is the only way how you get through this. And I liked it a lot. I even remember it and shared with you. But as a Christian, I have another statement for you from the Bible, from the famous Psalm of David, where he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And I can continue to quote the Psalm. I hope that many of you know it by heart. But the point that I take for me in the context of this seminar is when we go through hell, when we go through the shadow of death, when we are ready to lose ourselves, if we know God, we are already not alone. We are not alone. He can hold us. He can carry us. And even though you might question everything and even existence of God, that's okay. We can discover intimacy in our relationship with God going through grief that we probably never experienced before. This is the great reward. And as I'm coming to conclude this presentation, I want to share with you another image or picture of healing through grief or reconciling grief. Why it's so important? As I mentioned, we all experience losses, but unfortunately, not all of us have courage and guts to face the pain and to start this process of reconciling, mourning, and healing. And the image that I like is that when we experience pain, when we lose important member of our family or something that is dear to us, our injured reaction is to compartmentalize it, to repress it, and to put it away. And it's like you in a swimming pool, and I don't know if you ever in a swimming pool play with a ball. And as a child and even as an adult, I like to take a ball sometimes and put it down on the bottom and stand on it and try to hold it with my feet. And you can be successful with it. But as we go through life, if we experience loss, if we experience grief, and we don't more than grieve it, we don't feel it outside of ourselves, we don't engage, and we try to put it down, to suppress it, and try to keep it down under the water, trying to keep a good face, trying to move forward, it's still there. And life is so complicated that it's never just one thing. We experience other losses. And I don't know if you can be a circus artist, and if you ever try to put more than one ball under the water, it's impossible. I try to put one or two, but what happens eventually? They pop. And the deeper you put it under the water, the more pressure you put, the stronger it pops and comes out and jumps out of the water. And eventually it's catching up with you. You cannot repress it. You cannot hide it. You cannot compartmentalize it. The answer to problem of grief is mourning, healing, engaging it, and dealing with it. And it's a process. It's not an event. You cannot just get over it. It's something that you cannot do alone. So that's why I'm excited that you are listening to this seminar. That's why it's exciting that you have courage. And I do believe the reason that you're here, that we're talking, is because you have courage to engage it. Maybe you in the middle of your journey, maybe you just started, maybe you're thinking about it. But I encourage you to begin this journey, because the reward is when we missed certain part of ourselves and we repress and put it away, we reduce ourselves and we go through life instead of 4 cylinders on 1, because we push away those things that we consider dark and we don't want to talk about it. But when we experience it, when we grieve it, when we find more meaning in it, it's like we regain those missing parts of us and we become whole again. We cannot replace, we cannot restore what we lost, but we can reconcile and we can regain part of ourselves that was connected and we feel that it's lost, with new meaning, new energy, and we can experience joy in life. Thank you. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for being good listeners. And I guess at this point, we will open it for questions.
Thank you, Chaplain Roman, for that enlightenment. I'm sure everyone got something from those words. Me personally, I am enlightened. Now we can start a journey towards healing. Those who have questions, you may place it in the chat box, or if in Facebook, you can put it in the comments section. I have a first question here, Chaplain. The first one is, how long should be the grieving process? Is there a specific month that we should grieve, or is it okay to grieve for more than a year?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And it actually comes from our culture, where we think that it should be a specific time and we get over it. But in reality, as I mentioned, we cannot completely get over it. And it's normal when not just a few months, but a few years later, there is something. We come to the bakery and we smell, and I can say, this smells exactly like the bread my mom made. And I can start crying. And it's normal. And that's how I honor my mom. And it's okay. So we cannot put a time frame. But I think as the time progressing, and If we do this, it's one of the hard work in life, grieving and going through mourning. But we can talk about our loved ones, about our losses with less sadness. So, but we cannot put a time frame on it. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another questions here. Do you suggest any resources to help with the healing process?
Yes. Ideal is if we can find those who went through the similar process with us. And technical work would be to join a grief group. And nowadays it could be even through Zoom. And I say grief group because everyone's grief is unique. But for example, there is a grief group for those who are lost a newborn. There is a grief group for those who lost their spouse. There is a grief group for those who experience, I think, the wives of those whose husband died in action, and so on. So there are things in common because it's extremely therapeutic. I do believe it's more effective even than personal counseling. That's what I recommend, and this is what helped me, the grieving my parents. I was part of the group of 5-6 people that were encouraging, uplifting, and it's important who is part of this group. It all also depends how dramatic and traumatic is grief. It could be so bad that it sends us into like clinical depression. And in this case, it's important to have a counselor. There are people who are called grief counselors, and it's helpful to read on the subject. I like the book Understanding Your Grief by, what is his name? If anybody will be interested, I can mention few resources, few books. If it's a video will be posted somewhere, I can mention few books as a resource. But again, it's important to use multiple resources, live people, not just books.
Thank you. We have another question from Facebook. What is the difference between grief and mourning?
Grief is feeling that we have. Just like we experience anger, love, fear, grief. Mourning is the public expression of your feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Mourning, when you express your feeling outside of yourself, when you talk about it with your family, when you cry together with your family, when you share it in a grief support group, when you paint because you experience grief, when you do journaling, you are mourning. So mourning is the expression of the feeling of grief. So we all have grief, but not all of us, unfortunately, express it and mourn it. And the key to healing is mourning, expressing your grief.
Thank you, because that's my follow-up question, supposed to be like, can you reach healing without mourning, but you are grieving?
No, if you are grieving and you keeping it to yourself, I don't think your healing could be complete. You just get stuck there probably. And one of the indication for me, my personal indication of healing is when I can talk about my loss to other people. And the more I tell my story, the more healing I experience. And there is a point that I can talk about my losses. Before, I couldn't even mention. I begin to sob. So.
Thank you so much. Is there any more questions from Facebook or in our Zoom? I have another question here. Why is it I'm still crying even though the loss happened maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago?
Mhm.
Is it normal?
It could be normal. Again, there is nothing wrong with crying. Uh, in my grief support group, when I was crying, someone asked me, Roman, what are your tears about? What are you crying about? And this could be a good question to ask, because it could be that 10 years from now, maybe I'm crying because I feel sorry for myself. There could be many reasons why we are crying. But also, uh, if we didn't do a diligent um, work of mourning, it's still inside, and it's easy for us to be triggered and crying. So crying is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's important to understand what it means for us. Maybe it means that we are still at the beginning of, because time doesn't heal all the wounds. If we experience loss and we didn't properly mourn and engage our grief, we still could be at the beginning of healing, and we can experience all this emotion could be indication that we need to engage what we have inside. So
Thank you. There's one more question here from Zoom. It says, what are some things we should not do when supporting our friends through grief?
uh, sometimes you need to avoid friends who thinks that you need to get over it, who try to prescribe you how to grieve, how we should look like. So those are friends that you should avoid, or you should not be this type of friend. And people who give you a very good Polish answers, because when you grieving, it's the process when you need to find your own meaning, your own identity. And sometimes when we trying to rescue our friends from grieving, we are not helping them. We actually stopping the process of grieving, and they don't feel free. So the best thing you can do is to be with someone, to be with someone on the journey, to support them, not to direct, not to direct them. Yes.
So your presence.
Yeah, and your presence should be non-anxious. That, and it happens only as a chaplain. That's part of the training, that we need to learn to be at peace with our own grief. Many times people feel uncomfortable around those who are grieving, crying, and mourning, because they have something inside that they don't know how to deal with. And because they feel uncomfortable, they suppress, make comments, and so on. So that's that's the worst thing. So that's why when you are grieving, it's important to choose a friends, people who are supportive presence for you, who can accept you and be with you, versus trying to expedite your process and push you and drag you through this. So that's so
Well,
it's one of the major misconception when we think that nobody can help us through gifts. There are people who can help just by very fact being there. Yeah.
we have another questions here. Do all of the 6 steps you spoke on have to be addressed for mourning to be complete? Or do these steps have to be done in order?
Number one, they don't have to be done in order. Because again, when we go through mourning, through grief, it's a not orderly, neat process. It's not like we finish stage, like they describe in some books certain stages, denial, acceptance, and so on. It's all mixed. You can go and then you can flip back and so on. But I mentioned them as the most essential and common for almost everyone who is grieved. Like, we need someone. We should not go through this alone, because in order to engage it, you need to talk to the family, to the friends, to the supportive presence. If you don't accept the loss, you cannot grieve. And this is, for example, the fundamental difficulties and challenge of ambiguous grief, because how you can accept something that you don't see, or it's confusing. So all those things that I mentioned, they are fundamental for almost every person grieving, but they don't come in order. But almost every one of them very core and very essential, and simply knowing about it makes you more aware about it and helps you to make more meaning of your grief. For example, if you know that you have extremely low self-esteem and don't feel about yourself much, but once you understand that you go through identity crisis, because what you thought about yourself was dependent on relationship with your spouse for a long time, and now you have to do new tasks. Once you know it, it helps a little bit to normalize it and understand you're not crazy, you're simply grieving.
Thank you. We have another question. Do support groups serve the same purpose as grief groups? Example, groups to support someone who was the victim of a violent, who is grieving the loss of their sense of security. A support group for something with cancer who is mourning their loss of a lifelong illusion of good health, or violent crime. So do support groups serve the same purpose as grief groups?
I think grief support group could be a little bit different, but eventually it's the same purpose. God created us this way that we experience healing and recovery when we are with people of the same mind who had the same experience. And for example, for me, the fact that I tell my story for someone who has the ability to hear me, they don't have to say anything, but I feel like I understood and heard, makes a huge difference. And the very fact that I know that they lost someone too, and they just quiet and don't say even a word, it already has a tremendous therapeutic effect. Yeah.
So it seems that I don't see any more questions. All are very good questions and have a very good answers to everything that we heard tonight. Is very helpful in our journey towards healing. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you for coming, and we hope this was helpful and you learned something this evening. Please come to our next event, Real Talk About Women's Health, with nurse practitioner Pam Lolor on Tuesday, May 25th at 6:30 p.m. Thank you, Chaplain Roman Kozlov.
Thank you.
And
Thank
have
you.
a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.